Amen. So good morning, everybody, to this session of the course Global Bioethics and the UNESCO Declaration in Bioethics and Human Rights. That is an optional course of the program of the Licenza in Bioetica in our Ateneo Pontificio Regina Apostolorum. Yesterday, we started a first approach to what global bioethics is. And during the conversation, we identified some aspects that are really very precise, and you mentioned in the session of questions and answers, is the factor of the element of universality on the one hand. So it's a bioethics that it's trying to embrace the reality of different countries, different cultures, different religions, and then there is a claim of universality that is expressed specifically in the relation between bioethical issues and human rights. And of course, the protection of the environment, as well as the clinical bioethics and biomedical research, is part of the topics and the situations that global bioethics will try to give an answer. We'll give an answer using the main international instrument or tool we have in global bioethics is the UNESCO Declaration in Bioethics and Human Rights. But before getting into the 15 principles of global bioethics, I would like to mention some of the main traits, the main features, wait a minute, of global bioethics. This was the outline, and we are going to deal with point number 2. And in global bioethics, if we want to map the field of global bioethics, we have to keep in mind that when we are talking about bioethics in general, there are some areas or some concepts that are part of what we call classical bioethics. As we have already mentioned, biomedicine, sometimes we talk about medical ethics, about clinical ethics, about ethics of scientific research, about health ethics, public health. And so these are different expressions in which we can identify bioethical issues traditionally. But the specificity of global bioethics in comparison with these other concepts of bioethics or ethics is that global bioethics proposes an appropriate link between the issues of bioethics and human rights, and human rights as a universal ethical paradigm that must be taken into consideration when discerning in ethics, when taking decisions or carrying out actions in the field of life sciences and health. So the point of reference of human rights as the core of global bioethics is human rights. And that means that global bioethics, it's related to what we can call biopolitics or biolaw, because and not at the national level, but specifically at international level. Because when we are talking about global bioethics, we are not dealing merely as a kind of academic reflection, but the legitimacy and the inspiration of global bioethics comes from the representatives of the states, of the governments that are members of the international community. So it is within the international organizations that we can find the source of global bioethics. And when we are talking about the international community, means that all all the states belonging to a specific international organization like the United Nations or UNESCO or the World Health Organization, they are participating in writing, in negotiating these rules, these principles. So this perspective, it's more universal and also more general, but it has the function to illuminate the decisions and the measures, the policies that at a local or regional level should be taken. So the core of this slide of global bioethics is that on the one hand is global because it embraces the whole planet, but that is global in terms of the participation of democratic participation in the elaboration of these principles. And this, of course, offers, on the one hand, a legitimacy, political and legal legitimacy, that is supported by the human rights law or the human rights theory, since we claim human rights are universals, and that, of course, will have to be adapted, as yesterday read in Professor Henk ten Hag, locally. So this is inherent to global bioethics, this tension between the claim of universality on the one hand, and on the other hand, the need to adapt or to apply the principles to situations that are different in the northern countries and the southern countries, in the west or in the east. So if we move forward, I think it's interesting that global bioethics gives a greater emphasis on the social and communitarian dimension of bioethics. We mentioned, even in respect, in comparison with personalist bioethics, offers these social perspectives where topics related to justice, to equity, to vulnerable populations is more explicit in global bioethics than in the principialism, as we mentioned yesterday, and also in respect also to personalist bioethics. In the Catholic arena, if you ask Catholics about bioethics, most of us will answer that bioethics deals with abortion, with reproductive technologies, with organ transplantation, with euthanasia. All these topics used to be analyzed in general more from a more individualistic or personalist approach. And I think we have missed something in using the social dimension that is not exclusive of global bioethics, because as we will see, this is also part of the social teaching of the church. In global bioethics, the emphasis is in the political, public, and legal dimension of health. And that's why topics related to governance or public health, or it's also present more in general than when we study personalist bioethics. On the other hand, the fact of being global, the fact of being the result of the negotiation at international level, makes global bioethics more open to the globalized and inclusive world. Because in these international organizations, we have different cultures, different religions represented. And then it implies a breach between the West vision or the Western vision and the Eastern vision, between the North and the South. On the other hand, as it is connatural in the international community where there is a lot of diversity, global bioethics requires or is more suitable for a constructive dialogue looking for convergences and collaboration in diversity. And the challenge, of course, is, we have to use dialogue, negotiation, and we have also to look for the elements we have in common. And look, we have here something that we have in common globally. But on the other hand, there is the risk of relativism, because I can use the principles of global bioethics in situations and then make a manipulation or interpretation of the texts of the principles that are not ethically sound. So this UNESCO declaration is not the Bible, is not going to save the world. It's a guidance, it's like a guidelines that can help the countries of goodwill to make or to be a vehicle to irradiate these principles and these values to the citizens in general, to the countries, to the governments, to the policymakers, and taking into consideration a realistic vision of human rights and duties. The Universal Declaration assumes that the life, freedom, integrity, family, etc., are fundamental goods for the existence of people at individual level, but also at a communitarian level. And then when applying these principles, we have to be careful and to assure that we are considering that these fundamental goods are essentials. And it's the same right to life or right to freedom in Nigeria or in Spain or in the United States or in Bolivia, because we all are part of this moral community, global moral community, and we assume that all deserve that these fundamental rights be recognized be protected, be promoted, be guaranteed in case they are violated. And of course, we can challenge the United Nations and UNESCO and say, but look, yeah, they're claiming, they're talking and writing about human rights, but the reality is that there is a lot of injustice in the world, a lot of violence, a lot of abuse, and it is true. It is true. But if we take a look to the history of the United Nations and other international organizations, that is quite recent. We are talking about basically by the 20th century, by middle of the 20th century. So the states and the government have been trying to coordinate themselves to promote peace in general, to promote these human rights. And we don't have to forget that in correlation with the rights, there are also the duties and the responsibilities. And this is something that in the Western tradition is not sufficiently emphasized, because we love to claim and to cry, I have right to life, or I have to right to freedom, or I have to right to have a baby, or I have to right to marry same-sex persons. Well, I have rights. And where are the duties? Where are the responsibilities? So global bioethics moves from a more individualistic to a more communitarian approach. Global bioethics moves from a more Western approach to bioethics, a more Eastern bioethics. It moves more from rich countries' vision about bioethics to a more southern and less developed countries. And it tries to create this harmony of the principles that we will have the opportunity to analyze. So let's go to move to the UNESCO Declaration in Bioethics.
Please, Professor.
Yeah.
Just a clarification. In global bioethics, is it on the same page? That is it a system of bioethics, just like we have principalism and personalist bioethics? Is it the same way we can view global bioethics?
Could you repeat your question?
I said, now, while talking, you made reference, I got the impression that global bioethics could also be considered as a system of bioethics, just as we have principalism, we have personalist. Is this the same way that we can consider global bioethics?
Yeah, it's a system of bioethics. Okay. It's a system. It has, as we will see in this course, a lot of similarities in terms of substance, in my opinion, with the personalist approach. But the difference is not in the content. The difference is in the source. What is the source of personalist bioethics? Basically is the philosophical or the ontological, metaphysical derivatives from philosophy, anthropology, and ethics that is also supported, of course, by the Holy Scripture, and it's not the result, as it is in global bioethics, of political negotiation. Principialism. At the origin of principialism, there are two guys, Tom Bishamps and Childress. They wrote, they were academics. And it was this academic reflection that makes grow the principialism as the utilitarianism grows with Stuart Mill and other philosophers. So the origin of this system we call global bioethics, it's political, biopolitical or biolegal sources. In this instrument of the 15 principles that was approved by acclamation in 2005, 192 countries of the world participated. Also, the Holy See participated. As I mentioned, you, Father Miranda, was the official plenipotentiary, the representative of the Holy See for the negotiation of this instrument that was approved by acclamation. That means that at the end and after a process of negotiation of 2-3 years, the final text that was submitted to the vote of the 192 was so persuasive and so good written that the representatives started to clap for the approval, and it was approved by acclamation. It's quite unusual for a legal instrument in international law to be approved by acclamation. That means that it was, if one of the countries would have asked, I need to vote, then they have to sit down and then to say approve, yes, no, or abstention. But in this case, it was so, the negotiation was long, but it takes some years. In the final session in October 2005, when it was proposed to submit to the vote of the representatives, they started like standing up and clapping, and they started. So it was not necessary. That was, in terms of the text, it has a lot of legitimacy, but they were politicians, they were representatives of the states. They were, some of them, of course, they were academics or they were experts, but they participated with the power of their governments to decide and to negotiate and to sign and to approve the text. Okay, so in this UNESCO declaration, we are going to visualize and study the 15 universal principles of this declaration. Some of the rules that should be taken into consideration in the application or interpretation in the public or a private arena, and we have to know that this is not an international treaty, hard law. It's a declaration That is what in international law we call soft law. I think some of you have been follow already, or are you going to follow my course of international law? And I will tell a couple of things about what does it mean that the UNESCO declaration is not hard law, but it's soft law. First of all, we have to know that UNESCO is an international organization or an agency of the United Nations, in which there's 193 members participating. The headquarters of the United Nations are in New York, and UNESCO, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the FAO, the international labor organizations, these are agencies. What is the difference? They work as an international forum. In other words, in the meetings where they negotiate and take decisions, they're 93 representatives, in addition to the observers, like the Holy See. The Holy See, the Vatican, is present in all these international organizations. Do not forget that the Holy See, the Vatican, is also in the state. It's the state of the city of the Vatican. As an state, he is part of the international community. And it was the Holy See that decided not participate in the vote during the votations. But it's a decision of the Holy See. Why? Because the Holy See prefers to keep neutrality because of his or her universal mission. And they're Catholics that are members of the 193 countries. And the Holy See doesn't want to vote against China because there are Catholics in China. They don't want to vote in favor of a country that could be in conflict with another country, because in both countries there are Catholics. But it is a decision of the Holy See. But the Holy See has participated participates in all these international organizations like UNESCO. What is the difference between UNESCO and the World Health Organization? We have to read the acronym. The UNESCO deals with topics related with education, science, and culture. This is what it means, UNESCO, United Nations for Education, Science, and Culture Organization. So that's why also the Universal Declaration in Bioethics and Human Rights has a pedagogic, it's a legal instrument of soft law, as we will explain later, but it's more in order to educate people in population. But there's other international agencies like the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization, you know, have been very active during this time of pandemic, and it works in the field of public health. Pandemics, vaccines, massive infections, problems that affects not only individuals, but communities or countries or regions, or like in the pandemia, like in the pandemic, when it's at a global level. UNICEF instead focus on the protection of children around the world, to give them protection, to guarantee they are not abused, they are not object of trafficking, they have avoiding the mistreatment of children around the world. The FAO works on it's the Food and Agriculture Organization. They focused on problems related with poverty, hunger, sanitation, and also the promotion of agriculture to feed the people. So as you can see, the different agencies of the United Nations, they have different competencies. As I mentioned you yesterday, the United Nations in New York, they have the responsibility of the big topics related to peace and war or international security. But in both cases, in the headquarters or in the different agencies, these international organizations work at the same way. They take decisions that have the same mandatory or the same obligatority. It's a compulsiveness. In other words, a declaration of the United Nations in the headquarters has the same force, legal force, than the declaration approved by UNESCO. And in this slide, we will see this in the course of international law, more detail about other international organizations. ONU, the United Nations, the UN, it's global scope, global, embrace the whole world. But then we have different regional organizations, like the organizations of the American states with 35 members, the European Union, and the Council of Europe are two different organizations, even though both are in Europe. But to the European Union belongs, now it will be 27 without the UK, and the Council of Europe, 46 countries. And there are other organizations. I am not going to focus on that right now, but I want to explain you that at the origin of the UNESCO Declaration in Bioethics and Human Rights, the source is UNESCO. UNESCO means it's the United Nations. And in the United Nations, in order to get the approval of this declaration, required the participation of 193 states in the process of negotiation, approval, signature of the Universal Declaration. The other important thing, yep.
Please, could you go, okay, on this slide, these agencies under UNO, I am not seeing a World Trade Organization. Is it not a branch of UNO?
Yes. The thing I forgot to mention that in this slide, I mentioned only those agencies of the United Nations that have more to do with bioethics, and the trade organization, it hasn't to do directly with topics related to bioethics. This is not an exhaustive list of the agencies of the United Nations. there is, I think it's like 25 or 30 different agencies. This is only those that, in my view, are closer to bioethics, because the World Health Organization deals with public health. UNICEF deals with the protection and health life of children. FAO, because deals also with the environmental things, that is part of bioethics. And International Labor Organization, because also there are some topics related to work, like health in the work, that might have some relation more directly with health issues.
Excuse me, Professor.
Anthony, yep.
I wish to be clarified. When you talk about 193, are we talking about those who participate, who took part in the UNESCO? Does that talk about the countries that were involved, and does it mean that almost all the countries were represented? Because if you want to look at it, I think it's only about, if you want to look at it, all the countries were to be represented, should be about 196, as the case may be. Let me be clarified, was it all the countries that were represented, or they handpicked some people who are members? I just want to be clarified.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So 193 are the members of the United Nations.
Okay.
And at that time, when in 2005, when they approved the Universal Declaration, 193 countries were represented. And the Holy See and the Palestinian Authority is not in the state, but it participates as an observer because it's a subject of international law. They also participated.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understood your question and if my answer.
Yeah, that is okay. I got it.
Okay. Look, that in your case, in most of your case, you have at the regional level an important international organization that is the African Union. And the African Union is inspired in the United Nations legal instruments, but also you also have at regional level in some specific or more concrete instruments of international law that it will be important for you to know not only the United Nations tools, but also those more specific, because in your continent, in Africa, you have also an international organization that is, in the way it works, it's very similar to the Council of Europe, and it's very similar to the Organization of American States. It's very similar. I'm not going to get into the detail, but it's important to know, and this is the following slide, and then we will make a coffee break, that these instruments of international law are integrated in the legal system, in your legal order in your country. So you have your constitution at the top, as we have studied in constitutional law. We have the international law, and the Universal Declaration in Bioethics and Human Rights gets in this part of the pyramid, certainly as a soft law, not as a treaty. We will talk about this. And we have the national law. So it's like the sandwich between the constitution and the national law. But that means that in the sandwich, you have to include the cheese in the middle. And then you can use the international law also to inspire and to illuminate the topics related to the national law, even in the case that is not a treaty. In other words, it's not mandatory, legally speaking, but has an importance that comes from the fact that as a soft law is a precursor of a hard law instrument. And there is an ethical and a political responsibility of the states to embody, to use these universal principles when you are writing your own national law. And that's a vehicle of applying these principles in your national regulations or your national legal order. So as we will talk in international law course, it's important to know that the difference between an international treaty or a declaration. Look, for example, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights approved in 1948 has been greatly used and very important for the peoples in the last 50, 60, 70 years from the approval. It's not it's not a binding instrument. It's a declaration. It continues being a declaration, but it's very important. So the core of this idea I want to tell you is be attentive, because sometimes one can say, oh, declaration is not important. It will be better a treaty. Could be, but it doesn't mean that it's not important, a declaration. Actually, as we will see in the course of international law, soft law instruments for non-binding have been the precursor of hard law, international treaties, agreements, conventions. Okay. Okay, let's go to make a 15 minutes coffee break, and we will see you in 15 minutes. If for you is okay. Do you have any questions or suggestions? Okay.
Thank you.
See you later.
Okay.
Okay. So in this second part of the session, we are going to talk and to discuss about the Universal Declaration, because this Universal Declaration is like the roadmap of the global bioethics. Remember that this UNESCO Declaration has the inspiration of the Declaration of the Human Rights of the United Nations in 1948. In 2005, it's approved this by acclamation, this instrument of soft law that has application, should be applied at a global level because it is the United Nations. And so we know that from the legal point of view, the declaration is a non-binding instrument of soft law, has an ethical and political force, but it's not an international treaty. The objective declared by the declaration is to establish some principles and some procedures that should inspire legislation at national level on the one hand. But it is also a point of reference for actions and decisions of individuals, of communities, of companies. So this is not only a message for politicians, but the UNESCO declaration is has come as target the whole society, governments, communities, individuals. The point of departure is the recognition and respect for dignity and human rights. And you know that, so dignity is a concept, human dignity is a concept that is very, very debated, because we don't talk about I have right to dignity. We talk about I have right to life. I have the right to freedom. These are the fundamental goods. And dignity it's like a prius. It's like a condition of possibility. And then human dignity has been used also in the language of the UNESCO declaration, as also the declaration in 1948. And the concept, when you try to discuss why we are entities entitled with dignity, there are a lot of responses. Some are religious responses. We can say we are talk about our dignity because we are made in the image and likeness of God. But you don't need to give a religious explanation of dignity to acknowledge that humans are entitled with this special status that make us a little bit different from other entities, from non-humans, animals, or from plants. But it doesn't mean that we are going to mistreat non-human animals or other living beings, or the water, or the skies, or whatever. But human dignity, it's correlated with human rights. It's like an unity, because once we recognize the presence of a human being, there is some moral, ethical obligations and duties to treat properly humans. On the other hand, this declaration that was written, especially in the light of the progress of science and technology and biotechnologies, recognize also a fundamental freedom, that is the freedom of investigation, the capacity and the convenience for the society to promote the scientific development. And in parallel, recognize the duty or the responsibility of sharing benefits of any scientific research, so that not only rich people, powerful people can have access to the benefits of science and technology. And we will read in the declaration how this social component of the principles are present, and how this social component is probably the most significant or important contribution of global bioethics, or the declaration to bioethics in general, in comparison with other systems like principialism, or even the personalist bioethics. Let me see what is going on. Okay. The one point of departure in reality in the declaration is at the end of the declaration, but it's important from the beginning that when we will read and study the 15 principles of the UNESCO Declaration, we have to know that in the mind of the legislator, in the negotiation, the 15 principles are interrelated and they are complementary. There is no hierarchy. We use in even principialism used to emphasize one of the 4 principles. Could you write me from the 4 principles, which is the principle that principialism has emphasized? Go to the chat and write me. We have 4 principles: justice, autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence. Which is the most invoked and most chat? No, my goodness, you have written exactly all those that are less emphasized. It's autonomy. Bravo, bravo, Modis. Is autonomy. This is in part influence of the Western view: freedom, autonomy, pro-choice, your decision. The important is the individual, is the person. And then I can take decision by myself. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but in the principialism, though in theory, both of 4 principles should have the same value, autonomy has prevailed. Autonomy has prevailed, and has prevailed not only in the United States. You move to South America, North America, Europe, and it's autonomy, 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 the freedom. And it's very important because it's freedom. It's a fundamental good of our existence. But in the UNESCO declaration, they took care to say, hey, the 15 principles are equally important, are interrelated and complementary. And this statement, this should be interpreted as a whole. And these principles should be understood as complementary and in relation to each other. So in the declaration, before entering the 15 principles, on the one hand, the UNESCO highlights that in the field of taking decisions in bioethical issues, these principles are going to be complementary to, I would say, to the professionalism and integrity of professionals. In other words, they are codes of ethics, of doctors, nurses, businesses, anesthetists, surgeons, codes of ethics. When we are talking about professional rules, means that the UNESCO is giving value to the work of professionals that gathered to establish their rules of the art from a legal point of view. In Latin, we call the lex artis, the law of the art. And the UNESCO is not going to cancel these professional rules or guidelines. And the UNESCO is, as a democratic forum, happy to promote dialogue and debate among the people and among professionals about these principles, because remember, these are not rules already written. You have to do like this, like that, like this. You have principles. And with these 15 principles, you have to discern. And it's not easy. So this kind of dialogue and discussion among the people in general, or among between professionals, is also important. On the other hand, the declaration knows that there is a lot of ethics committees going on. In the field of biomedical research, you have in the hospitals, in the labs, ethical committees. They should use these principles in addition to the national law. So this is not, oh, now the Universal Declaration is the word of God, this is the Bible, and no rules, no national law. No. So we have to use both. And this is a source of inspiration for the ethics committee in the laboratories, in the process, for example, of the approval of protocols of research, of clinical trials. Keep in mind this. Keep in mind, this is the idea of principles. Can help you to take decisions. On the other hand, it's necessary in the field of research, the appropriate evaluation and management of the risks in the use of medicines, the use of technologies. These are some of the premises of the declaration. And as an international instrument, the declaration, it's fostering this universal or global ethical perspective. That means that in respect of the principles, the projects should be analyzed, ethically speaking, not only in the country of the promoter of the experimentation or the research, but also in the place where the experimentation is going to take place. We are talking about transnational research, transnational projects. And the declaration tries to avoid what has been sometimes a practice, that some companies have been activating clinical trials in countries where the ethical standards are lower or doesn't exist, in order to avoid the restrictions that the national law is putting on this kind of research. Okay, I go to Asia, I go to Africa, I go to Latin America, where the requirements are less demanding. UNESCO says, no, no, the ethical evaluation should be also approved at local level, not only where the money comes from. And it mentioned also the declaration, the in particular problem regarding the bioterrorism and the engagement, the commitment to fight against bioterrorism, the use of scientific and technological knowledge to produce weapons or war devices that can affect, of course, the life, the health of the people. This slide is some general, like a framework, general framework that the declaration presents, and the declaration offer some suggestions or some tasks that the governments, the states, should do. And they agreed. They approved by acclamation and accepted that the government should legislate according to this principle, inspired in this principle. The governments accepted the commitment to educate and offer training in bioethics. And also to foster dialogue and debate about bioethical issues. And this is something that is happening. This is something that is happening, of course. And also the UNESCO declaration and the office in Paris right now is supporting and helping the countries to create bioethics committees. For example, UNESCO, it's even paying the training of peoples in order to create the National Bioethics Committee in some of your countries in Africa. I'm not sure. Could you tell me if in your countries you have a National Bioethics Committee? You can open your microphone and to tell me if it exists, if it is in a project, or if it doesn't exist at all.
In Nigeria, is in process. I think UNESCO is sponsoring the formation of a bioethics committee in Nigeria, and they have had already 2 seminars for this. The first one was in 2013, and then the second one 2017. They are coming. So they are preparing already something like that. But the one that is already solid now is Health Research Ethics Committee. That is established, helped by American health organization, American Health Association or committee. So there are 2, but the one of UNESCO is still in process of formation. It's not yet rooted yet.
Okay. And there is someone from other country in addition to Nigeria. Lawrence, you're...
Professor, though I'm still talking from the background of, I am a Nigerian.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a question best on what you said about the ethics committee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I understand that it should be, let me not say mandatory, or it should be necessary to have ethics committee in all the hospitals, especially the mission hospitals. I don't know whether I'm right.
I think so,
Yes.
but it depends of the national law of your state in Nigeria or at national federal level in Nigeria, because you have Nigeria is integrated by different states, isn't it?
Certainly, yes.
Okay, so the competence of health and public health, I'm not sure if it is a federal or in a state competence. If it
By
is,
law, it's federal competence.
okay, if it is federal, probably you have a federal law on health.
Yeah.
If you have this, if you read that law, hopefully it's established that hospitals and hospitals carrying out also investigation, they have to have these kind of committees. Usually it's established the number of members, the background required in the people participating, and these committees are not remunerated, are not paid. They have to work pro bono in order to avoid influence from the hospital that since I'm paying you, you have to say yes and to approve and not to reject the projects. But at this committee, they have to deliberate once a month, twice a month, depending, for example, to approve the protocols of research and investigation. They have to give their approval before submitting, for example, a project to start a clinical trial for a new drug that is going to be approved by federal authorities, the federal authority approving drugs for to selling into introducing in the market new drugs. You need an approval. This approval comes from the government at federal level, but requires also the approval of the hospital, previous approval. And then if it is approved, the researcher will start all the process, the procedures, to invite volunteers, to invite patients, and all these things. Normally, this comes, it is present, in your case, probably in the federal health law or federal law on health.
Yeah, Professor,
Yep.
I agree with you. But there is another aspect and dimension that I am looking at.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility of the church coming in to form a committee like this. The workability, I see 90% success because commitment on the part of the participants will be there. And now that you're talking about a situation whereby the committee members are not paid, then the church will be able to handle that dimension very well. And especially when it comes to sensitive issues, which are supposed to be taken care of, I think the church will be able to work on a neutral ground than those other people also. Because some influence, if it comes in from another angle, it may not really work out. But I see the workability if the church comes in with our principles, that it coming from another angle also.
Yeah, I totally agree, Lawrence. And in fact, in the composition of the ethics committee, usually they're also religious or cultural mediators that belong to the committee, because it is not only it's not only an ethics committee of doctors. Doctors should be there. If you are going to deal topics related to an specialty, at least one of the members of the committee should be of that specialty, an anesthetist or a gynecologist, in addition to other doctors. And usually there's also religious people participating, and they can, of course, contribute in the deliberation, because it is not, in some cases, it is not only a technical decision that should be taken, but when a doctor asks the committee, I am in a situation in which I'm not sure if I should do or shouldn't do this, then there's the ethics committee has to deliberate. In the deliberation, you need also people from different cultures, different religions. Take into consideration, you know better than me, that not only Catholics, you need also Muslims there. In a country with like Nigeria, that also legally speaking, there is the recognition of Islam. You cannot ignore also that point of view. In some countries, for example, in Mexico, the law states that in addition to the technical, cultural, religious, scientific members of the committee, at least one should have a certificate or a certificated training in bioethics. That is quite uncommon, because there is very few centers and universities training in bioethics. And so, for example, in our university in Mexico, Anáhuac University, they have received a lot of students that wants to follow the program of the master diploma, because they before this law, Mexican law, was not required to have a training in bioethics. And after the law, the training, the accreditation was necessary, so they had to follow some courses to have the document that you have a certificate that says that you have enough knowledge in bioethics, because it's going to be useful in the deliberation of the committee.
Yeah.
Okay, Professor, in South Africa as well. Oh, over to you, Lawrence. It's fine.
Yeah.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. I was saying, I was like a bit surprised that in South Africa we also do not have National Bioethics Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But what is more dominant in South Africa is the National Health Research Ethics Councils. That is what is more dominant here.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look around again in the hospitals, they are using basically this health research ethics councils. But there's only one university in Durban which has this a hospital ethics committee. That is the only one, is the Gray's Hospital in Durban. So I think it's a serious issue that we really need to deliberate on. It's an issue that we really need to work on, because we really need a body which we can take all our matters pertaining to bioethics to that particular body. I think it is very important, because in South Africa, what is only dominant is about research. It's that's all that. They're basing their ethical reflections on matters pertaining to research. But there's no body that is relevant for matters nationally pertaining to bioethics.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends. And that's one of the commitments of UNESCO, how to develop, they call capacity building in ethics, capacity building. Capacity building means how we can help the countries, they don't have it yet, certain structures helping the ethical aspects to be taken into consideration properly. For example, in some countries, I think in Italy, you have il Comitato Nazionale per la Bioetica. This is to give general opinions on topics that are necessary, but they do not work in the hospital. They work to, it's like an advisory committee of the government. But then you have a national agency to approve le prove cliniche. I don't remember right now the acronym, but it's like an agency to approve the drugs, the process of elaboration a new drug. But then you have in the hospitals also the ethical advisory committee of the hospitals in case. And so, in other words, this is the idea of capacity building that here mentioned the UNESCO foster the creation of bioethics committee. It's not only the national committee, this is one, but there is other institutions that in order to do the things better from an ethical point of view, it will be important to have these kind of committees, multidisciplinary, diverse in terms of cultures and expertise to support the decisions of the professionals or the people in general. Okay.
Professor,
yep.
Because of how urgent coronavirus, how urgent the need for a vaccine, I don't know whether there was any need or whether they have brought in the ethics committee to look at the drug before they are being used.
Yes, in the case of the COVID vaccine and in Europe, in the countries belonging to the European Union, public health is a competence that was delegated to the European Union, And that's why the European Union has the European Agency for Drugs. That is the committee that has to evaluate from the scientific point of view and from the ethical point of view that a vaccine is safe and efficacy, safety and efficacy. So even though some of the researchers have been done in the countries, the national authority has to submit the approval to the European agency. That's why once it's approved by the European, the vaccines, whatever it is, can be distributed in Italy, in Spain, in France, because it has been already approved by the European Union that it's the competent authority for public health, because the members of the European Union decided to think in the common good of the European Union as a whole and not to decide the 27 countries by themselves.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Professor. Going back to that aspect of vaccines. I've seen this particular vaccine where they've written to be distributed in South Africa, Nigeria, Pakistan, and all that and all, but not in Europe. Is that where that aspect that we've been talking about comes in? That the European Union has got its own vaccination program that does not really involve like countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Pakistan, and all those that are written on the package to be distributed to, but not to the European countries.
It could be, I'm not informed in detail about this thing, but the European Union, before the vaccines started to be tested and approved, before they wrote contracts with some companies. The European Union knew they were working in a vaccine with the hope and the confidence that this company, AstraZeneca, and others, will succeed in producing a vaccine. So they invest European money from the citizens, from all the Europeans, they invested money to produce the vaccine and then to receive a convenient price if the vaccines was successful. And it could be that in the list were not the Russian vaccine, was not the Chinese vaccine, because they have partners they thought more reliable, they had closer contacts, or where companies were European, with European partners, and they decided at the beginning, at least the 3-4 vaccines they were to support. And I'm not sure what happened if they excluded some vaccines that are those that now you in Africa are receiving. I know that the Chinese vaccine I think is been used in Africa, but also they are using in Chile, for example. So it doesn't mean that because Europe has chosen the best vaccines, and then the African, Latin American, or the East countries, they gave the worst, because they didn't know at the beginning when they negotiate with the companies, they didn't know if they were going to produce something that could be approved by the European authorities in terms of security and efficacy. Okay, so talking about the promotion, also the declaration mentions the participation of NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and how they might collaborate in the promotion of these principles through international cooperation, through international dissemination of knowledge, through agreements and cultural or scientific agreements, and then they have a role. They have a role also in the promotion. And let me start, because we have been talking about what means global, universal, bioethics in the field of life sciences and health. We have been talking about the application, the principles, these principles that are correlated and interdependent. Let's go to a start, and this afternoon we will continue with the principles, the 15 principles Here they are in one slide. I'm going to show you after this slide another one more colorful. But I want to stop right now in this first slide because I think it's important. You have the 15 principles, I would say in a very short statement. The first principle, human dignity and human rights. The second, harmful effects and benefits. In other words, we have to take this into consideration. This is a kind of telegraphic so that you can remember better the ideas that are contained in the text. And we will go to the text. The 7 first principles are 7 principles in blue because are more focused in the individuals, in the person. The informed consent, the number 3, recognize the value of autonomy and individual responsibility and informed consent. Number 5, the protection of persons that are not able to express their own consent, like minors, people with mental disorders. We have to protect them. It's the individual or special groups of individuals. The protection of human vulnerability and personal integrity. We will talk this afternoon about human vulnerability and the respect of privacy. All these 7 principles are more focused to the individual. It's more an individualistic perspective. But what is important comes later. From point number 8 to point 15, most all are principles that are especially focused on how to guarantee the good of the community. The social perspective of the declaration is especially present in these 8 to 15. And look, of course, you can find some of the 4. Let's go to identify where do you find the principle of beneficence, right in the chat. Where is beneficence? And read not only one number. This is not one number only. Let's in the chat. Anthony, number 2, the fact of pondering, evaluating the benefits and potential harmful effects. But if you want, you find also beneficence. For example, Bravo, 13, why not? Sharing benefits. But not only because you use the word benefit, but because the fact of sharing benefits is something beneficial for the people. But what do you think about number 5 or number 10? The respect of cultural diversity and pluralism. It's also beneficence. Or even if I respect your religion in a medical treatment, I'm doing something good for you. It's beneficence. It could be interpreted not only in a biological or medical point of view. You can enlarge the concept. And you have also number 14, the protection of future generations. Why not? And 15, why not? Because it's a concept that is very broad. And what about non-maleficenza? Non-maleficence. Where do you find non-maleficence? Non-maleficence. I think that 12, Lawrence, you mentioned more from beneficence, isn't it? Let's move to non-maleficence. Where do you find non-maleficence here? 9, it's very explicit. Non-discrimination. 6, respect. 6, that might be more beneficence than non-maleficence, don't you think? Okay, I think that 9 is clear.
How about number 7?
Number 7. Yes, but you have to move to violate privacy. But in more explicit, there is one. What do you think about this? 2, why, Leonard? How non-maleficence is present in this principle? Explicitly.
Even harmful effects, the expression, the harmful effects. And,
Bravo. So look, you have, and tell me something about autonomy. Where you find autonomy or freedom, the principle of the principialism, to what extent is present here? Number 3, it's clear, explicitly are talking about autonomy and individual responsibility because you decide. 7, also the autonomy, the respect, because you can open by your decision, you can open it, is also number 7. Something else? What do you think about this? Number 4. It's informed consent means that I should receive. Number 4, exactly. You receive information and then you accept a treatment. You accept to participate in a clinical trial. Number 13, sharing of benefits. Yeah, autonomy. Number 13, it requires to articulate a little bit more. And let's go to the last one about justice. Justice, the 4 principles of principialism, where we find justice in an explicit or implicit, but implicit with Number 8, of course, it's justice, it's equality, it's non-discrimination. It's a matter of justice. Look that in the principialism, one of the criticism of principialism, or the principle of justice in principialism, is that it makes more the reference to distributive justice. So how we should distribute scarce medical resources when we have more needs than the things we can distribute. And it is true, and that's why in the Universal Declaration it's justice, but justice comes from equality and equity that are not exactly the same things. And then you are mentioning number 12, social responsibility in health. Look, very interesting. This principle number 12 has been very important because it includes in the Universal Declaration, and we will see this afternoon, some aspects never considered as bioethical issues, like poverty, like illiteracy, like hunger, like water. We will come back to social responsibility, but yes, some of the justices in sharing, and so in number 12, social responsibility, also sharing the benefits. Bravo, but it's sharing the benefits. So if I'm participating in something, I should be part of this. And this, what is behind this, is the abuse that some companies in the past did by carrying out research with humans, with subjects from developing countries or poor countries because it was less expensive. And the answer of the UNESCO Declaration is it's not to forbid this kind of research, but share. If you are going to benefit, you have to be just in sharing the benefits, and not only to use my people, my population, because they are poor, and then you are not going to compensate and to share the benefits of science and technology. So as you can see, and in this conversation we had in the chat, we have identified, on the one hand, that the paradigm of the 4 principles, yes, are present in some of the 15 principles, but that probably the 15 principles are more explicit, more concrete, and especially more social oriented. It's not only for, it doesn't contain the UNESCO Declaration an individualistic Western vision of bioethics, but it's more a social, communitarian, and therefore global perspective of bioethics.
Professor?
Yep.
I want a question. I was reading an article written by Judith Warner in New York Times, and she was writing on issue of how Americans are going to India for this womb renting, that is buying the womb of poor Indian women, surrogacy.
Surrogate maternity, yep.
Yes, and where they usually go, they go to they hire these women from the rural suburbs, rural areas where they are very, very incapacitated by poverty. They are, and this is the technology they use is this ART, artificial reproductive technology, and UNESCO. I'm reading the article 2 or 3 of this, and they are talking about the application of science knowledge and the progress in science, the application, so that it doesn't violate human dignity and all these things. And this is international, as even this it's not a binding law, it's a soft law, but seeing that this act first involves the application of knowledge, progress, and the science and education. It's education, application of fruits of education. And it's being applied to exploit poor women, poor people, poor nation, poor race. UNESCO, until now, there is no international, I've not seen international law or restriction on this action. This surrogacy of fertility, especially as regards to poor nations. And UNESCO is interested in the dignity and promotion of life. How could UNESCO come in to regulate these kind of activities internationally?
So the UNESCO cannot regulate the problems of India. There is a principle of international law of non-interventions from one state to another. What UNESCO can do, I'm not an expert in the topic of surrogate maternity, it's to say, hey guys, this is something that is not okay. And most of the countries, India knows they have a problem with this. India knows. And it's the Indian people who will move the politicians to have a law to regulate this, because the problem in India, as far as I know, because I had a couple of Indian students that were doing their tesina on the topic, is that India knows the problem, but they don't want to change it. So UNESCO can do some political work, diplomacy work, but cannot establish a regulation for a single country, because for the single country is the Indian government and the Indian parliament.
But Professor, since this has become global, it's as if it's becoming, UNESCO is transnational, it's international, it's global. And a matter that has taken a kind of more than 3 or 4 nations becomes partially global, let me just say, because it's international something. And since it involves international nations or different nations, can't a kind of international mediation or regulation say, okay, you powerful nation, because I see it as a kind of powerful nations dominating or taking advantage of the poverty of poor nations. Indeed, can't UNESCO make a kind of, okay, if you want to do it, let it be on your level, but don't go to other nations or whatever, with the principle of respecting of human dignity, which is a transnational principle.
Yeah, the problem, Leonard, is that for any international regulation, you need the agreement of all the members of the international instrument. So if you try to sign an agreement of the UN on surrogate maternity, this is going to be mandatory for only for the countries that accept to be part of this treatment. because a treatment is like a contract. If India doesn't want to sign the contract, they are not going to approve neither an international treaty nor a national law. What the international community might do is to alert India. India, this is not okay. It's similar to the problem that happened in some Muslim with the ablation of the clitoris of the women. That is against human rights. Of course, you can use it denunciation. You say in English, it's a kind of alert denunciation. It's diplomacy, except in which some terrible things are happening in a country can be justified an intervention of the United Nations. But you are talking basically situations of war, a very, very dramatic situation. Is not the maternity surrogate. That is a problem, of course, but it's not of that level when the United Nations are legitimate to overcome the limit of the international law of non-intervention of the countries on the business of other country. But in that case, that intervention is not a country that will be a kind of belligerent act. It's the international organization moving their troops for an humanitarian corridor or to mediate. It's not a country, it's not the United States moving their troops. They move their troops because they want, because they are responsible, or because they are called by the local leaders. Hey, gringos, come here to help me. But when intervenes the United Nations means that there is something like a genocidium or something like this, very eclatant, very sad.
Another something is becoming a little bit complicated. This, as you said, that for them to pass law or to make an international treaty, member states must agree or sign the law, sign it before it to take effect in their own nation. I begin to wonder what will be the platform, the equal platform to discuss on things and make decisions. Because if you see, there are powerful nations. We have powerful nations. Like in Europe, many European countries are powerful and can dominate poor or whatever, the weaker nations, just like Africa and some countries in Africa. And when they come to round table, they can do a lot of lobbies, backyard lobbies to convince the poor ones to accept. Let me use typical example now. Example of, let me use Nigeria. Nigeria and on the issue of family planning. Family planning, I think it comes under, we can talk about it on equal family planning, population regulation. Now there is a kind of move for population regulation, especially in Africa. And all these is taking effect. I sometimes say, I think World Health Organization is also in line with this kind of population regulation, and UN is in line of population regulation. I see, I am wondering whereby there is a campaign to reduce population through contraceptive, through all these things. And in another country that is promoting this population control, they are using artificial reproduction to increase population.
Yeah.
Is it not, well, how do we say this? And they come together to dialogue. I don't see I'm confused when I look at this. Now, the monetary income of artificial reproductive materials is getting them millions and billions of dollars, and they are advertising it to use it. Yet, to control a population, you are giving people contraceptive, reduce here and increase the other side. Where is the equilibrium in the dialogue?
Yeah, this is a long and a very complicated debate, because if, of course, in absurd, if you think in terms of global of a country, on the one hand, you are planning and avoiding babies. On the other hand, you are promoting to create babies. This is part of the original sin. And the prevailing of the autonomy, because for those who don't have babies, I'm going to facilitate to have babies.
Okay.
For those that can have babies, I need to control the population. It's a kind of absurd. But and on the other hand, and I conclude because it's late, it's the problem of politics. I understand what you mentioned. Big countries have influence on small countries, or powerful, weak. The alternative is we don't want international community. We don't know the dialogue between weak and powerful, between rich and poor, because at the very end, they influence. I think it's a mistake. In the history, if we take a look to the international community from the 20th century, in general, has contributed to better conditions of understanding and peace among the peoples in general. And it is true that it's influential, but at the very end, when you have to vote, the vote of a Nigerian representative has the same value that the vote of the United States of America. If you Nigerian representatives are accepting to vote yes, to abstain, or to vote no for other reasons, because I want to be close to the influential, this is another business. This is part of the life itself that you have to move and to play in the international arena. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to accept politics or conditions, because for the good, I hope, for the good of your people in Nigeria, it's better to vote yes or to vote no or to abstain, and not for personal interest or because I'm a friend of this other representative, but you are representing the people of Nigeria. Accomplish your mission properly and ethically. Okay. Okay, let's see this afternoon at 5. Take a break. Have a nice lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
Thank you.
It has been an interesting course. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.